I have watched people argue about real estate and stocks for more than half a century, and most of the arguments are useless before they even begin. They start with loyalty. One man loves houses because he can touch them. Another man loves stocks because he can ignore them. One man worships leverage. Another man worships liquidity. Both men usually arrive carrying a conclusion instead of carrying a pencil. That is why they stay confused. Whenever I want to know which path is better, I do not start with ideology. I start with a yellow legal pad. I put down the cash, I put down the time, I put down the hidden costs, I put down the taxes, I put down the stress, I put down the opportunity cost, and then I wait for arithmetic to embarrass the loudest man in the room. Arithmetic is very good at that. I want to walk you through a comparison that sounds simple and turns vicious the moment you count everything that matters. Imagine two men at the same starting line. Jake has $50,000. Marcus has $50,000. They make the same income. They live in the same city. They are the same age. They are not smarter than one another. They are not luckier than one another. They simply choose different wealth machines. Jake buys a rental house. Marcus buys a broad index fund and keeps buying it. Most people think the answer is obvious right away. They are wrong right away. Jake feels rich on day one because real estate gives you theater. There is a front door, there is a driveway, there is a tenant, there is a rent check, there is something to point at from your car window. He can say, I own that house. The sentence sounds heavy, it sounds adult, it sounds like progress. Marcus gets none of that emotional sugar. He wires his money into an index fund, turns on an automatic contribution, and receives the least impressive proof of ownership in the world. A number on a screen and a confirmation email. No one wants to see. If you judge an investment by how important it makes you feel in the first year, real estate wins in a landslide. If you judge it by what it leaves in your pocket after 20 years, the conversation gets ugly. That is the first rule. Do not confuse social proof with financial proof. I have seen people become devoted to bad investments simply because the investment gave them an identity. They did not own an asset. The asset owned their ego. That is especially common with rental property. A man buys one house, and by Saturday he is no longer a man with one house. In his own mind, he is a real estate operator. He has a story, he has jargon, he has a key ring, he has a barbecue speech prepared for anyone unfortunate enough to stand within 20 feet of him. He tells you the rent. He does not tell you the leak. He tells you the zestimate. He does not tell you the vacancy. He tells you the appreciation. He does not tell you the Saturday he spent sitting on a stained carpet waiting for a contractor who never showed up. That is why I say the rent check is not income. The rent check is raw material. What you keep is income. And between the rent check and what you keep, there is a slaughterhouse. Let us run the numbers the way grown men ought to run them. Jake takes his $50,000 and uses it as a down payment on a $250,000 rental property. He gets a 30-year mortgage at 7%. The monthly mortgage payment comes in around $1,330. He finds a tenant willing to pay $1,800 a month on a lazy napkin. That looks like a wonderful arrangement. Rent minus mortgage leaves him with roughly $470 each month before anything goes wrong. The phrase "before anything goes wrong" should frighten you more than it frightens most people. Because in property ownership, things going wrong are not interruptions. They are the business model. The house does not apologize for existing. The roof does not care that you had other plans for that cash. The water heater does not wait for a stronger month. The tenant does not study your budget before moving out. This is the second rule in real estate. The exceptional expense is usually just the regular expense arriving all at once. If you do not understand that rule, rental property will teach it to you in the most expensive way possible. Jake gets through the first year feeling clever. The rent arrives, the mortgage gets paid. He drives by the property and smiles like a boy looking at his first bicycle. He tells himself he has made money while sleeping. He tells himself the tenant is paying the mortgage. He tells himself the tax write-offs are going to make the whole thing even sweeter. This is the dinner, party premium. I like naming mechanisms because if you can name a mechanism, you can see it before it bites you. The dinner, party premium, is the emotional overvaluation investors assign to assets that sound impressive in conversation. the less arithmetic an investment requires to look glamorous. The more dangerous it usually is. Marcus has the opposite problem. Marcus owns a boring machine. His $50,000 goes into an index fund. He adds $300 every month. No one congratulates him. No one asks to tour the fund. No one says, "Wow, you are really building something there." He opens the account every few months, sees that the number is up a bit, down a bit, then up some more. And he feels nothing dramatic. That is exactly why the stock market makes so many people rich and so few people feel rich while doing it. Boring is a moat. The machine you can leave alone is usually the machine with the best chance of compounding. By the end of 3 years, Jake has collected a respectable pile of rent. On the surface, it looks powerful. But now we need to drag out the hidden ledger, property taxes, insurance, a month of vacancy between tenants, cleaning, relisting, a water heater, a roof leak, the small humiliations of management that people insist on calling passive income. Whenever someone tells me rental property is passive, I know two things immediately. Either he is paying someone else to do the work, in which case it is not passive after fees, or he is lying to himself, in which case it is not passive after labor. There is no magic door in the middle. Jake decides to save money by managing the property himself. This is where I introduce the third mechanism. I call it the time rent. Time rent is the hidden monthly charge you pay when an asset demands your attention instead of your money. Most investors never record it because no invoice arrives. That is why it gets ignored. Anything ignored long enough begins to impersonate profit. Jake answers calls at night. He coordinates a repair during lunch. He screens tenants. He drives over when a sink backs up. He cleans the property after a move out because he cannot stand paying somebody else to do something he thinks he can do himself in an afternoon. That afternoon becomes a weekend. That weekend becomes a pattern. The pattern becomes part of his life. He still tells people his tenant is paying the mortgage, but in reality he is also paying with time, energy, and attention. Those are not romantic payments. Those are real payments. Marcus has a different experience. His fund keeps sitting there like a field no one talks about because the crop is underground. He keeps adding $300 every month. He receives no urgent phone calls. He replaces nothing. He litigates with no one. He is not required to become a part-time handyman, a half-trained lawyer, a reluctant collections agent, and a weekend scheduler just to remain an investor. And here is where the first great misunderstanding appears. People look at the early years and think Jake is obviously ahead because the property gives him leverage. That part is true, but they fail to understand the price of leverage. So let us name it. The fourth mechanism is the leverage amplifier. Leverage is wonderful at increasing outcomes and perfectly indifferent about whether those outcomes are pleasant. That indifference is why so many people who speak beautifully about leverage have a history full of panicked decisions they would prefer not to revisit. Jake used $50,000 to control a $250,000 asset. Marcus used $50,000 to control $50,000 of the market. That 5-to-1 difference matters. If the property rises in value, Jake gets the benefit on the whole asset, not just on his down payment. That is the intoxicating part of real estate. Small amounts of your money can sit under large amounts of borrowed money and make you appear brilliant if appreciation cooperates. But leverage has a companion. Nobody likes to invite to the seminar. I call it the fragility tax. The fragility tax is what highly levered owners pay for needing things to remain. Okay, if appreciation slows, the story weakens. If rent softens, the story weakens. If vacancy rises, the story weakens. If rates move against the market, the story weakens. If one ugly repair lands in the wrong month, the story weakens. The stock investor deals with volatility. The leveraged landlord deals with volatility plus obligation. That is a completely different emotional equation by year 5. Jake has begun to understand what he really bought. He did not buy a house. He bought a business attached to a house. That distinction matters. People who treat rental property like a trophy often get punished. People who treat rental property like an operating business do better because they know the rent is not the product. The product is after expense, after vacancy. After maintenance, after time, after financing reality, most landlords brag using gross numbers because gross numbers are easy to remember and easy to admire. I have never met a gross number I trusted. Gross numbers are what investments tell you before they know you are serious. Net numbers are what they say after they realize you brought a pencil. If we tally Jake's real experience honestly through those middle years, the magnificent $470 a month has been chewed on by taxes, insurance, repairs, turnover, and the constant little erosions that no one includes when they are selling you a dream at a seminar hotel. His cash on, cash return after the truth is told is not shameful. It is simply much less magical than advertised. That is important. Real estate is often not bad. It is simply sold with too much costume jewelry on it. Now let us look at Marcus again because he has an opposite problem. Stock market people love to hide their own cruelty inside words like long-term and stay the course. Those words are correct, but they are not warm. The stock market demands a different virtue. It demands emotional inactivity. That sounds easy until you live through a genuine decline. If Marcus watches his portfolio drop 30% in a short period, no pipe burst caused it, no tenant stopped paying rent, no roof failed, that almost makes it worse. Because the pain arrives without a story you can fix. There is no contractor to call. There is no late fee to assess. There is only a screen saying that the value of your ownership claims has fallen sharply, and every fearful instinct in your body starts composing speeches about prudence. This is the fifth mechanism. The volatility mirror. The market is a magnificent machine for revealing to investors what they always believed about risk but never had to say aloud. Most people call themselves long-term investors when prices are rising. A declining screen is the first honest interview they have with themselves. Marcus must survive that interview repeatedly over 20 years if he wants the mathematics of compounding to do their real work. That is not trivial. People dismiss this too casually. An index fund is simple, but simple is not the same thing as easy. The stock investor's hardest labor is behavioral. He must sit still while the market tests whether he was buying businesses or merely buying feelings. Jake's labor is operational. Marcus's labor is psychological. Neither man gets a free lunch. This is where thoughtful people usually become tribal and start chanting slogans. Real estate always wins because leverage. Stocks always win because compounding. I have no patience for slogans. The correct answer is much more inconvenient. At around 10 years, the two men are in roughly the same neighborhood if you are honest about the numbers. Jake may be somewhat ahead because leverage helped him and appreciation was decent. Marcus may be close behind because regular contributions plus compounding did their quiet work. One man has more stories, the other man has more time. One man concentrated his risk in a single property in a single zip code with a single debt structure. The other spread his claim across thousands of businesses and let management teams all over the world work while he slept. And here's the point almost everybody misses. Wealth does not only consist of what you own, it consists of what your ownership costs you to remain in. That is the sixth mechanism, the carry burden. A high carry asset demands more maintenance of self, more vigilance, more tolerance for interruption, more readiness to inject capital at bad moments, more acceptance of illiquidity, more concentration risk, more dependency on local conditions. A low carry asset asks less of you operationally, but much more of you emotionally. It gives you liquidity and freedom at the price of visible volatility. When people ask me which one makes more money, I first want to know what kind of burden they are equipped to carry. A disciplined property owner in a strong rent market who budgets conservatively, manages like an operator, understands taxes, and buys with a margin of safety can do very well. A disciplined stock investor who keeps adding capital, ignores the theater of the market, and survives major drawdowns without panicking can also do very well. An undisciplined owner in either camp will invent sophisticated reasons for mediocre results. Now, I want to talk about what makes real estate genuinely powerful because too many stock enthusiasts become smug here and miss what the property people are really buying. Real estate has three weapons. the average stock investor does not naturally possess in the same form. The first weapon is controlled leverage. The second is tax engineering. The third is utility. Utility is underrated. A rental property can sometimes be house hacked. It can sometimes solve your own shelter cost while producing income from adjacent units. A good property in the right market can become both an asset and a life positioning move. Stocks cannot let you live above the cash flow. A duplex can. Tax engineering matters too. Depreciation, when used intelligently, is a strange and powerful gift. You may own a property that is rising in market value while the tax code allows you to deduct the theoretical wearing out of the structure. That is not a small detail that can change after-tax economics dramatically. Add a 1031 exchange, and the tax deferral features become even more interesting for the serious operator. Those are real advantages. I do not dismiss them. But I also do not romanticize them. Every advantage in finance has an invoice. Leverage sends its invoice in fragility. Tax benefits send their invoice in complexity. Utility sends its invoice in involvement. That is why I say property ownership is often best for people who want a business in disguise and worst for people who want a trophy in disguise. Now let me tell you where stocks keep humiliating people who underestimate them. The stock market's greatest strength is not just the average return. It is scalability. Jake wants more wealth from real estate. What does he usually need to do? Buy another property, take another loan, take another management burden, accept another set of tenants, another local market, another repair stream, another concentration of time. Marcus wants more wealth from the market. What does he need to do? Increase the automatic contribution by $200. That is all. This difference looks small until you stretch it over 2 decades. A modest increase in contribution inside a compounding machine can create an astonishing gap because compounding multiplies consistency. The machine does not care whether the increase felt glamorous. It only cares whether the capital kept arriving. This is the 7th mechanism, the contribution multiplier in the stock market. Small repeated additions become very large because they are added to a machine designed to reward duration. In real estate, more money often means more units, and more units often means more moving parts. The first machine scales with discipline, the second often scales with management capacity. That distinction matters enormously for ordinary people with jobs, families, and finite patience. By year 20, the numbers tell an uncomfortable truth. If Jake's property appreciated reasonably and he did not get mauled by bad luck, he may have built very solid equity. If Marcus kept contributing and let compounding work, he may be in the same ballpark without ever buying another toolbox or speaking to a tenant. This is the point in the conversation where ideological people become useless again. The real estate man says, "See, I told you houses win." Look at the equity. The stock man says, "See, I told you markets win." Look at the freedom. I say both men are half right and therefore dangerous, because the real lesson is not that one asset class always defeats the other. The real lesson is that hidden costs, hidden time, and hidden structure determine whether a visible asset becomes invisible wealth. Let me put it more bluntly. Jake worked for his asset. Marcus waited for his asset. Jake's machine rented him capital, but it also rented him responsibility. Marcus's machine rented him compounding, but it also rented him volatility. Neither one got paid simply for being present. Jake needed operational discipline. Marcus needed behavioral discipline. So which one would I choose? That depends on the investor. If you are the sort of person who genuinely wants to run an operating asset, who does not mind concentration, who understands maintenance reserves, who does not lie to himself about time rent, who buys in a market with strong rent to price ratios, and who can remain conservative even while using leverage, real estate can be a beautiful machine. If you are the sort of person who wants breadth, liquidity, low operational burden, and the ability to scale wealth simply by earning, saving, and consistently contributing while never trying to outsmart the market. Mood swings. Broad index investing can be a beautiful machine. The tragedy is that most people do not choose based on their actual temperament. They They choose based on which machine makes them feel more like a winner in the first 12 months. That is how bad decisions get dressed in confidence. I have another rule. Always ask not only what an asset earns, but what version of you it requires. A rental property may demand a more available, more patient, more hands, and more system-driven version of you. A stock portfolio may demand a more emotionally mature, more inert, more independent version of you. Most people fail not because the asset betrayed them. They fail because they bought an asset that required a character they had not yet built. That is the eighth mechanism, the character requirement. The best investment for you is often the one whose discipline pattern you can actually survive. Now, I want to deal with a final illusion because it causes endless confusion. People say real estate creates more millionaires. That can certainly happen, but the phrase hides something critical. Real estate often creates millionaires because it combines leverage, forced principal paydown, tax features, and emotional commitment. The owner is dragged into consistency by the structure itself. A mortgage bill arrives, rent must be managed, equity quietly accumulates. The owner cannot glance at the value every second of the day and panic, sell one bedroom, because CNBC became dramatic. That forced illiquidity can save foolish people from themselves. The stock market offers less protection from your own hands. The account is liquid, the sell button is available, you can sabotage yourself from the comfort of your couch. That flexibility is wonderful for mature investors and disastrous for emotional ones. So sometimes what people call the superiority of real estate is partly just the inferiority of their own market behavior that is worth remembering. If you are a chronic tinkerer, a serial panic seller, a man who can turn a simple index fund into a three-ring circus because the screen moved on a Tuesday, then yes, a property may save you from yourself precisely because it is harder to unload in a burst of fear. But I would rather become the kind of man who does not need handcuffs to behave well around good assets. That has always seemed the more scalable solution. Now, let us bring this to a protocol. If I were teaching a young person how to compare stocks and real estate, honestly, I would tell them to run 5 tests. First, the keep test after vacancy, taxes, insurance, maintenance, capital expenditures, financing, and management. What do you actually keep? Second, the time test. How many hours does the asset demand each year, and what is that time worth to you? Third, the fragility test. What happens if appreciation slows, rent weakens, or repairs cluster in one ugly season? Fourth, the scale test. If you want much more wealth, can you scale this machine by contribution, or must you scale it by complexity? Fifth, the temperament test. Which discipline pattern are you truly built to follow for 20 years without self-sabotage? Run those 5 tests and half the debates disappear. Ignore them, and you will spend a decade congratulating yourself for being approximately right while remaining exactly blind to what the machine is charging you. This brings me to the identity shift, because the best line in the whole subject is not real estate or stocks. The best line is from performer to allocator. Most people approach investing like performers. They want a story to tell. They want to feel clever. They want visible movement. They want to sound advanced. They want applause from people who have not done the math either. I want you to become an allocator. An allocator does not care which asset class wins the argument at Thanksgiving. An allocator cares which machine converts his scarce inputs into durable after-tax wealth with the least mismatch between arithmetic and temperament. That is the flip performer to allocator. Once you make that flip, your questions improve instantly. You stop asking which asset sounds smarter. You start asking which machine leaves me wealthier after counting everything. You stop asking where millionaires are made. You start asking what I can actually execute for 20 years without delusion. You stop asking which camp flatters my identity. You start asking which burden I can carry and which burden I should avoid. Those are adult questions, those are useful questions, and that is why the final answer to real estate versus stocks is both simpler and more demanding than people want. Neither always wins. The machine that wins is the one whose hidden costs you counted, whose burden you understood, whose tax features you respected, whose scale you can handle, and whose discipline pattern matches the person you really are. Jake and Marcus were not wrong to choose different machines. They were only wrong if they believed the headline version of either machine. Jake is wrong if he thinks gross rent is profit. Marcus is wrong if he thinks low effort means low discipline. Jake is wrong if he ignores time rent. Marcus is wrong if he ignores panic risk. Jake is wrong if he assumes leverage only magnifies success. Marcus is wrong if he assumes compounding works for men who keep interrupting it. And both of them are wrong if they think the asset alone deserves the credit. Wealth is usually not built by choosing a magical asset. It is built by matching a sound asset with a sound behavior and then refusing to quit the arrangement when it stops feeling exciting. That is why I have always preferred plain arithmetic over romantic argument. Arithmetic has no loyalty. Arithmetic does not care what is fashionable. Arithmetic does not live in a podcast clip. Arithmetic does not care whether a key feels more powerful in your hand than a brokerage statement in your inbox. Arithmetic only asks one question in the end. Did you include everything? That is the question I want following you around. When the property man tells you his tenant is paying the mortgage, ask him whether he included everything. When the index fund man tells you he made 12% and did nothing, ask him whether he included the years he almost sold everything at the bottom. When your brother-in-law says one path always wins, ask him whether he included time, taxes, concentration, liquidity, repairs, leverage, and behavior. Most people have not included everything. That is why most strong opinions about money are just incomplete spreadsheets wearing human skin. I do not want you to leave with a slogan. I want you to leave with a mirror. Look at the life you actually want. Look at the temperament you actually have. Look at the burden you are actually willing to carry. Look at the discipline you are actually capable of sustaining. Then choose the machine that still looks intelligent after you count every dollar, every hour, every headache, every tax, every hidden fragility, and every temptation to sabotage yourself, because that is the only comparison that matters. And if you ever feel yourself getting intoxicated by a neat little story about easy cash flow, easy compounding, easy passive income, easy leverage, easy diversification, or easy anything, I want you to stop, take out a pencil, and ask the question that separates adults from amateurs. Did I include everything? If the answer is no, you are not looking at wealth. You are looking at marketing. And marketing has made more people feel rich than it has ever made rich.